All right, my name is Jon Roethke, and I'll be speaking about ChainSafe guilds. So what is a guild? Well, it's not a new concept, and ChainSafe definitely didn't pioneer this. There are many companies that have already been implementing guilds, and maybe they call it something else within their organizations, but it's something that we recently introduced at our company, and it's done pretty well so far. The archaic definition is a medieval association of craftsmen or merchants, often having considerable power. And we are craftsmen and merchants because we do sell software, but I like this modern version better. I recently saw this tweet the other day by a lady named Caitlin Beagle, and I think it really epitomizes kind of the ethos of guilds, which is all about, no one person being an expert, and your learning doesn't stop necessarily. You're constantly testing what you know against what other people know, and always open to learning new things. So the modern definition is really a working group that regularly discusses a certain technology and learns about it together. That's really what we're trying to do here at ChainSafe, specifically with our guilds. And how does one, going back to Caitlin's quote, provide leadership in a specific area, in a specific space, while you're constantly trying to scale your knowledge and language in multiple different directions. And that's difficult because you can't learn everything. And we only have a certain amount of hours in the day and only so much brain power, and we have to learn from others. And it's especially nice when these other people are very knowledgeable and good at filtering information, because there's kind of too much information that exists in the world. So you need people to filter it, synthesize, distill, whatever, bring it down to a way that you can absorb it efficiently, effectively, and then immediately apply that knowledge, hopefully in your place of work or in your life in some way. So why do we need a guild? I kind of just answered that, but I have like 4 points that I've written down here. And of course, there are many more that I didn't include. You can kind of use your imagination, but I think these are some of the most important ones. Number one, learning. Guild provides a learning and onboarding like incubator. And I'll go into each one of these more in depth in the next couple slides. But number 2, promoting company interconnectedness, which is especially important in a remote working environment, such as one that we're in now for the foreseeable future. Especially software engineering is probably going to stay remote for some time. Continuous integration, and I'll get into that, but it's something that engineers know well. CI/CD, it's called, continuous integration and continuous deployment. And number 4, guilds help to reduce central points of failure. So let's start with number 1. Guilds could provide a learning and onboarding incubator. So onboarding is a challenge for any company. Typically, you turn over this big book, or you put people through a training program, and sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's too much information happening all at once, especially in the blockchain industry, where I think you could be overwhelmed pretty easily. Software is continuously evolving and things are constantly changing, and you have networks like Ethereum that have all these little projects within Ethereum ecosystem, and then there's all this history too. You don't have to know about the DAO hack. What is that? Why are people talking about this? Well, that was what, 5-6 years ago, the big one at least, and there have been many more since. So that's just one network, and all these different cryptocurrencies, and it's all very interconnected. And then looking at networks like Polkadot and the complexity of that alone, and then not to mention what Polkadot is built on or built with, which is this whole concept of substrate. How does that work? And there's just too much information for one person to know it all, or to try to learn it all, at least on their own. So guilds could provide an opportunity and an on-ramp for someone who's coming into an organization and looking to accelerate their their understanding of something, or learn about it in a less like daunting way. You let people around you, especially subject matter experts, distill that information. And you can read as many Medium articles as you can about the technology, but then hearing people talk about it and hearing people provide anecdotes. I like to think of, I used to work at a physical company, actual company where I went into an office every day. And ChainSafe is by and large remote. We have offices all over the world. We have personnel all over the world. And we don't often get to meet all together at the same place at the same time. And I'll get into that in a second point, but if you don't have an opportunity to be in a physical office, you miss out on a lot. You miss out on the water cooler conversations. And that's not so much about technology as it is just, feeling more connected to your coworkers. But that's the second point I'll get to in a moment. But this other company I used to work at, it used to be my favorite thing in the world, is just hear other people engaged in interesting discord. And typically it was about like which framework to use. React is so much better than something like Vue. And then you have all this back and forth, but you walk away from that conversation knowing a lot, and you don't even have to contribute. You just sit down and kind of be a fly on the wall. And guilds can serve in that capacity, where it's similar to like a conference room in a physical office that you walk by, and there are a bunch of individuals who are all talking about a specific subject. Guilds provide that opportunity where, at least in our company, we have a meeting every single week, or a time that we meet. I want to take that word meeting, and when I was first provided with the opportunity, the privilege to run like one of the guilds at ChainSafe, the first thing I wanted to do before asking, or right after asking, what are the rules? This guy basically hands me the keys to the guild and he says, it's all yours. Like, I said, well, are there any guidelines? Like, what can I do? What can't I do? He said, it's totally up to you. I said, well, okay, the first thing I want to do is change the perception of meeting every week. Like, I don't like the idea of meetings. And I think largely a lot of engineers don't either, because it can distract you, and meetings can be just another thing on your calendar that takes you away from your deep focus time. So I said, okay, I want to change the perception. How about we just call them hangouts? You can show up if you want. You don't have to. There's no pressure. We're not going to take attendance. There's no issue at all. It serves basically as like an open door policy. You can drop by. And if no one shows up, at the very least, I'll be there. And now there are a couple other guild coordinators, essentially like leaders of the guild, help coordinate times that we get together and talk, and then certain topics of conversation and so forth. But we really tried to like foster an environment of, well, a very welcoming environment, either for an onboarding purpose of a new hire, or someone even new to the industry. And ChainSafe employs quite a few different people, like, or at least different backgrounds rather, like in different professions. We have visual designers and so forth, and we have front end guys and gals and back end people, and then we also have people who are knowledgeable, specific in Polkadot and specific in, for example, Ethereum. We have libraries, Web3.js, Lodestar, which are Ethereum focused, and then you also have something like ChainBridge, which is kind of like more or less chain agnostic. So it's all over the place. And how do these people all communicate, and how do they share information, especially if we're not in a physical office and we don't see each other every single day? So this is kind of expanding into a bunch of different topics here, but it's really all about facilitating learning. And any new hires that come to the company, and like I said, this is daunting. Blockchain in general. How do you learn about all these networks? You probably can't expect to do it all alone. So providing like a room or a safe space where these people can go and just kind of show up, no pressure, no stupid questions, leave your ego at the door kind of deal. and just hope to just absorb as much information as you can within this hour or hour and a half. And sometimes they go up to 2 hours, which is crazy. I've never seen, and this kind of goes with changing the perception of the meeting, so-called. I've never really seen meetings go long and go over and people wanting to stay in meetings, at least voluntarily. But that is definitely not the case with guilds. Some of these, I on the calendar, we have about an hour that's slotted on our calendars for at least one of the guilds, especially the guild that I'm most interested in, which is the Polkadot Guild. And oftentimes these meetings or meetups will go for 2 hours. And it's just awesome to see, because you can tell people don't want to leave. I'll get to that in the next point. But yeah, these opportunities for learning, I think, are endless with guilds. So I was kind of rambling in the last point, but guilds do help promote company interconnectedness, especially in remote working environments, and especially with a company like ChainSafe that is by design distributed. I mean, we have offices in Berlin, in Toronto. We're thinking of opening offices in another place. We just acquired a company in Croatia. So people are all over the place, and not everyone has an opportunity to meet up at these conferences. So the conferences are great, but we can't always make our time so available. The last one was CSCON, I think, in Lisbon, and I wasn't able to go, and I definitely missed out, especially looking at the pictures and hearing the conversations that came out of that. And you can just tell that when people have a chance to be together, to really physically be together and see face to face and interface with one another, the dynamic changes, and you get to a much better feel for people. So if you can't do that all the time, like, does something like guilds provide a decent middle ground? I think so. I certainly think it can't hurt. So it definitely promotes interconnectedness, and it helps build culture within a company and keep culture within a company. And I'll get to that point a little bit later as well. So continuous integration, like I said, this is something that's many software engineers are familiar with, especially how it relates to code. That's pretty much the main reason that people would know about this. And that is the definition that I really stole here, which is the practice of automating the integration of code changes from multiple contributors to a single software project. Okay, that's fine about code, but why can't knowledge be the same thing? I mean, you have knowledge, I have knowledge, this other person has knowledge. I want all of that. And there's a way to somehow bring that all together into one cohesive thought thread. That would be ideal. And guilds have this opportunity to do that, where you have all these people coming from different perspectives, and they all have their understanding, and it's somewhat fragmented. Not everyone knows something very, very clearly. And even if they did, that's kind of narrow-minded to think you know everything about something. So I have an understanding of the Polkadot project, or the Polkadot ecosystem rather, from an outsider's perspective, from a builder's perspective. I've worked on Substrate, I've hacked around with it, but I could probably benefit from learning from someone, say from Parity, the company who actually built Polkadot, in those conversations that they were having, especially over the last 5 years when Polkadot was being like, when it went from like this nascent concept into this like budding technology, and Kusama starts developing, and then all of a sudden now it's taking off, and now people are talking about it, and now Polkadot's starting to implement these parachain crowd loans and so forth, and like this is actually becoming real. So I could really learn from someone who was there from the beginning, who really went, understands the conversations that were had and all the difficulties. Like there's a lot that can be learned from that. And I can read documentation all day, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to walk away with a really thorough understanding of something. And so that's why people write Medium articles. They're able to distill some technical concept in a way that some people just don't read documentation and immediately understand it. They need to talk about it. They need to look at, understand analogies and really talk through something. Well, how am I supposed to do that over Slack? or over like Microsoft Teams, say if you use a different software for communicating remotely, like sometimes that just doesn't cut it. You need to get a phone call or a video call or be in person and really feel something out. And companies and engineers and any business capacity, they're always busy. And the last thing you want is another meeting on your schedule and say, oh, okay, I have to sit down with this person and explain all this stuff. Well, maybe no, you don't. You just, I know that if this Polkadot guild, for example, exists within the company, and I know there's a slotted or a slated time each week for people to go to this like virtual hangout and talk about this specific type of technology and everything around it. And it doesn't have to be just that technology. For some, for example, we also talk about governance within the Polkadot guild. Now, governance isn't specific to Polkadot. Ethereum has governance too, and so does the US government. So does like natural, so does the natural world. There's a sense of like order. Like how does all of this come together? And is all of this relevant? There's no government, so to speak, or governance, so to speak, in nature, but maybe there is, And so it's like, where do you have that conversation? Over Slack? Like, I don't think so. You can't really flow over Slack. At least I can't. So selfishly, I wanted a space where you could feel free to just have a free-flowing conversation about some topic. And like I said, it could be about Polkadot within the Polkadot guild, but it also could bridge into Ethereum. And so there's no real, like, there are guardrails, so to speak. And as a guild like coordinator, they call it, as like a person who helps coordinate these hangouts and so forth, I just try to keep people within these guardrails and keep the topic somewhat focused, but also, allowing for people to kind of go off the rails, so to speak, and then come back and just seeing what happens and realizing there's so much knowledge sharing that can occur with something like that. So continuous integration, going back, like these networks that we're working on, this technology, this world that we live in is evolving so fast. Like, I don't think you can afford to feel like you know something and then that's it, especially in software, but this is also true in many different professional capacities. I mean, there's continuing education for a lot of different professions. In the medical profession, they call it CME, or continuing medical education. In the legal world, they call it CLE, or continuing legal education. In real estate, it's RECE, real estate continuing education. So it's not just specific to software, of course, but and I think largely it's been my experience talking to these people that they don't really look forward to continuing education. For financial advisors, I think they have to take a certain amount of continuing education, like credits every year, to keep up with their something like a Series 7, for example, which is the license that allows you to sell securities. So these people typically aren't excited about continuing education courses, which is the complete opposite of how I feel. And I think how a lot of people who work in software feel also. Like, we want to learn continuously. We want to be aware of these new networks and these new updates that are occurring, because we realize, like, not only this is our business model, we have to stay, relevant, but it's also something we love. We love talking about code and all these new updates that happen to programming languages and these networks. And so it's just a different kind of perception that exists. So being able to have a place where you can go knowing that you're going to walk away with some download of some exciting new project or technology or protocol or something within like 30 minutes or an hour, and you're getting it from people who work on this technology every day, and they can explain it in a way that that makes it easy to understand and to absorb. It's invaluable. And as a company, like, this can only ever make the employees and the individuals who are working on this technology and in these certain projects, it can only ever empower them, because it makes them more knowledgeable. And once they're more knowledgeable, they can start to accelerate the development pace, and everybody's on the same level now. So you don't have to wait for somebody else to get up to speed. You just send them over to this guild and say, it'll take you a couple of weeks, so to speak, while you're learning while you're reading documentation, you can also go here and be a fly on the wall and absorb contextual information. Blockchain has so much context that I think you need to have in order to work in this space. This, like I was talking about, this historical understanding of what's happened on Ethereum. I think it's pretty critical. And how do you do that effectively or efficiently? It's really difficult. And so I think guilds can provide a lot of that. And then number 4, this is perhaps my favorite point, reducing central points of failure. So we all work in this distributed world, or we're promoting, or huge proponents of this technology, of this, the idea of, fault tolerance, and the idea of, anti-centralization, and promoters of decentralized services, so that if one server goes down, or if one company gets hacked, for example, like, it's not the end of the world. And so let's think about this from a different perspective now. Like, you have teams within companies usually, and these teams typically have like team leads, and those team leads are in that position largely because they probably know the most about the product. And so what happens when that team lead leaves, or proverbially gets hit by a bus? And isn't that what they say about software engineering? Like, if you're doing a good job, you could be hit by a bus tomorrow, and it's not the end of the world, because provided that you've written code in the correct way, and you've documented it well, and you've detailed your thought process the entire time. Like, somebody else could step into your shoes. Of course, it would be really sad, but somebody else could step into your shoes, so to speak, and be able to pick up where you left off. And how can you do that if these processes aren't in place, and if knowledge transfer isn't a high priority? So in a team lead scenario, for example, like, that information and that knowledge about that product is typically siloed within that individual. Now, on one hand, that provides a great deal of job security for that individual. But on the other hand, it doesn't necessarily help with, going back to the tweet earlier, it doesn't help with scaling, knowledge and like learning. So, guilds can provide that also. Like, we work in this distributed world, or this, we're pushing this Web3 technology, hoping that it's going to not only replace centralized systems, but certainly become, very resistant to issues in the future, servers going down, or companies being hacked, and so forth, like I've already said. So why can't this also exist with knowledge? After all, knowledge is information. So, shouldn't we be working to try to help the democratization of information, especially intra-company? It's a curious thought, because I wonder how many companies are really working on this, and I think guilds provide a perfect opportunity for that. So there's just so many things you can say about this. It's really exciting. I've learned a ton from guilds. I've learned a ton from the people in our guilds. I hopefully have helped other people learn as much as whenever I learn something new, I'm really excited, because I'm kind of sitting here like, who do I tell about this new thing that I've learned? And I don't have to think very long about it. I just say, I just dump my information into the guild. And then come Wednesday or Thursday, when we have our hangouts, we can go into more depth about it, or more into depth about it. And it's great, because I know people are going to be wondering, like, how I came about this, or how I learned a little bit about this topic, and the same goes for other people. And it's really efficient to do things that way, I think, as well, because it cuts down on my ability, or my need to have to like filter between all this noise. There's so many articles out there on the internet. You don't know which ones are good or bad. And so you have to have like different indicators of what is a good article, and, what is a decent article, or, this wasn't written as well as it could have been, or like, this documentation's fine. It's a little confusing, but perhaps hearing it from the person who wrote the documentation who can explain it in a different way, and use their hands and and whiteboard behind them. It helps tremendously. So which guild should you join? ChainSafe offers, as of right now, like 6, but that's growing. It's all based on interest and where the most benefit will come to the company, of course. So we have products and projects within our company that are written in Go. We have projects written in Rust. Basically, everything that we do has to deal with cryptography. Some of the products we have obviously have front ends, so there are people who want to kind of get together and talk about design considerations for front end, like UX, UI, and that's not just engineering. That also has to do with designers as well, who may not feel at place in like the Go guild, for example. But then these people may want to understand how Polkadot works, which has something to do with Rust, because largely the Rust, largely substrate, which is what Polkadot is built on, or built with, was written in Rust. So if you have interest in learning substrate, like it benefits you and behooves you to go to the Rust guild and sit in and understand like best practices for writing Rust code and so forth. And of course, we have the product guild that discusses like product management concepts, and various PMs from within the company can go and then share what's working, what isn't, it's agile concepts and so forth. And maybe they've totally thrown away agile and they're going a totally different way, or talking about certain PM softwares and so forth. And of course, we have the Polkadot guild that I help manage. And of course, there's overlap. Like I was saying, Polkadot and Rust, they kind of go hand in hand. Now Polkadot and Go a little bit more go hand in hand, because we have Gossamer, which was one of the projects that was demonstrated yesterday during the CSCON by Elizabeth Binks. And Gossamer is the Polkadot host written in Go, which was originally written in Rust. So we're just basically porting that over. So these guilds are all over the place, and they really try to serve different audiences. So how does the guild growth look within the company? Just to give you an example about how much excitement and interest there is in something like this, especially within ChainSafe, where we have around 100 people in the company, like I said, all over the world, from Tasmania to Chile to Berlin, Croatia. I'm in California. It's all over the place. And so at the beginning, at least this is for the Polkadot guild, this is statistics for the Polkadot guild that I help run. It started with about 9 people, which was around 10% of the company. And now it's around 50 people in about 6 months. So there's been quite a lot of growth. I have to say it's been the fastest growing guild. We have the most amount of members within the company. It's largely because we're riding on what's happening in the market right now with all of this development within Polkadot, with the Kusama network and introducing these parachain loan offerings and so forth, and all of this stuff coming online. And there may not be as much excitement and people wanting to learn about like Golang syntax or Rust design, coding practices and so forth. Probably more people interested in just like the overall ecosystem in Polkadot, and like there are just so many areas within that, because it's such a behemoth and so complex. Like it can serve a much larger audience, and we're of course riding on these coattails of the market and so forth. So I don't think it's fair to compare necessarily, but I will say I think it's been awesome to see the growth and to see the variety of people who have come into the guild and who feel comfortable even just talking and asking questions. And that sounds crazy, but I think you probably get that more in a physical office environment where there's a conversation going on and someone stops by and says, well, I heard you two talking about this. Could you explain that a little bit more? I don't know anything. I work on the ChainBridge team, for example, and I don't know anything about Polkadot yet. I know we have the opportunity to bridge from Ethereum into Substrate, and it would only benefit me working on this ChainBridge team to know more about the Polkadot ecosystem, especially as more bridge solutions come out in the market. And the space becomes more competitive, like, how can I learn more about this? And well, go hack around with Substrate. All right, that is okay. Well, it's a big task. Like, and there's so much having to do with Polkadot. Like, I could benefit from someone like, who worked on the Gossamer team, who could explain, Grandpa and how like Ouroboros works. Like, these are things I could read about, but it's much easier to hear from an individual and who could, and especially at our company. And not only that, it's only ever going to make our relationships within the company stronger. And I think one other point that I want to mention before this slide is over. Oh yeah. So we're about done. Is the guild also provides a tremendous amount of like, yes, cultural, it allows for the company culture to be retained, I think, and also be built on. Like, if everyone's working in a distributed fashion, communicating over Slack, you lose a lot of the dynamics that you would often have in a physical working environment. It's called a traditional workplace. And so when it comes to promoting, companies typically want to promote internally. And so promoting engineers, it would only ever help an engineer to be able to explain his concept or explain the code that he's writing, explain the design practices and how the network that he's helping to like hack on, it would only ever help him and develop his communication skills, solidify his understanding, and also be able to talk to different audiences. It would only help him in his career path, or her. So the guild provides that. It provides this sandbox where some members, we even ask if they're open to it, providing small presentations. So someone goes and learns about, Cumulus, for example, over the weekend, and they'll come to the guild and then do a little mini presentation. It's great because everyone can walk away and say, oh, okay, I know how Cumulus works. Like, I know the concepts before, but now I specifically understand, like, oh, Cumulus is critical for parachains, not just important, like, or not just like an optional thing. It's vital. You can create a substrate network and not actually have to be a parachain. Well, that's interesting. But in order to be a parachain, you actually have to use Cumulus. And it's like all these little elements that, maybe it's easier for other people to understand, and it's less easy for me to understand. So selfishly, I need the guild. I don't know, but I think it only provides the company with opportunities to see who can take leadership positions. If you see people in the guild doing more management style and doing more presentations and better at relaying information, perhaps they could become a developer advocate, so forth. Perhaps they could even become a team lead. So it allows the company not only to become a closer unit, to understand each other better, to understand the technology they're working on better. It also, I guess the last point I'll make is, like, if I'm working on ChainBridge, for example, and I have interest in Gossamer, and I even maybe want to change teams, or there's someone who's working on Web3.js who wants to get more involved in like bridge solutions. Like, if they're interested in our ChainBridge project, for example, like, what would be the best way that they even present or propose like switching teams? Well, it would be very difficult because they're essentially starting from scratch. Like, it would just be as if we hired another engineer and it would just say, okay, you have to onboard. So it would be better if there was a way to like almost shadow within a company. Well, the company maybe doesn't have like this process in place. And it would also be awkward if this person like sat in on a stand-up, perhaps. Maybe, I mean, maybe it actually makes sense. Maybe it makes sense for this person to like clone the repository and start like trying to stand up a bridge, for example, or run the software that they would be working on. But then they're pulling away resources from the team because the team has to help them like debug because they're not so familiar with the service and so forth. And so the guild, guilds can also provide something similar to that, where it provides this sandbox, like hacking ground for people from all over the company with varying perspectives, wanting to learn more about a product. They don't have to now start from zero. They don't have to be onboarded, and then take 2 or 3 months, this onboarding process can be truncated to like a matter of days or weeks even, especially if documentation is great and people are providing like, this like ancillary or augmenting their understanding of reading documentation with anecdotes and code examples and so forth. So guilds have tremendous opportunity within companies. I think much more than people realize. And I've already said last point, but I think even more the last point is they also provide huge opportunities for providing an on-ramp into the company. So if you wanted to bring in new hires to a company, for example, the guild could actually serve as an external vehicle for going to these trade shows, going to conferences, and actually promoting the company from within, but not only the company, but what the company represents and technology that the company hacks on. So would ChainSafe go to a Golang concert? Sure, like members of the engineering team might, but wouldn't it be cooler if they went as an entire, like ChainSafe represents this guild that goes, and then anybody interested in Go at this Golang conference who's also interested in blockchain, there's that overlap. Well, ChainSafe has a presence there now. And so it provides people who they meet at these conferences. Maybe we sponsor like a hackathon or something like that. And now, a company doesn't have to spend so many resources on trying to figure out like how to pay, like, I guess, headhunters and so forth to be finding qualified candidates. You actually let the qualified candidates come to you. The guild can provide a learning opportunity and an onboarding so that when these people do get up to speed contextually with all this understanding of this like blockchain ecosystem at large, which is pretty massive, I mean, considering the amount of projects in this space, considering the amount of sheer cryptocurrencies in this space. I mean, it's like 10,000 coins. How do you have time to learn about each one of these projects? Well, even if you only focus on the top 50, even the top 10, there's so much within there. So there are just endless opportunities for companies, I think, to benefit from guilds. So hopefully this has been a pretty comprehensive conversation about guilds, a little bit of a ramble, but I appreciate you sticking with me. The next slide is really all about our hiring process and how we're not a process, but our interest in hiring and looking for people who are really excited about Web3 and the potential for that, and as well as really wanting to make the company stronger, better, and more exciting. And hopefully guilds are, I think they're kind of unique. And I've worked at other companies, but I absolutely do not or have not had the experiences that I've had at ChainSafe so far anywhere else, nor have I really heard about them. So it's a unique company. It's tremendous. And there's tons of opportunity for growth. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from anybody who's interested in learning more about ChainSafe and the multiple opportunities within the company. This is my Twitter, Waymo Beta. I'm also on Discord, Jon Roethke 3498, and then my GitHub also. So reach out if you want. Otherwise, thank you for your time.